Greetings, my friends. I am James Knox Polk, the 11th President of the United States. Today, I invite you to walk with me through the corridors of history, not through the W before I tell you the details of my life. I want you to imagine the world into which I was born. It was the year 1795. The United States was still a fragile experiment, less than a decade removed from the ratification of the Constitution. George Washington had just completed his time as the first president, and our young nation was still uncertain of its destiny. Would this republic survive? Could democracy truly endure in a world ruled mostly by kings and emperors? These were the questions that HOV the America of my youth was small compared to the vast country you know today. There were fewer than 20 states, most of them hugging the Atlantic coast. Beyond the Mississippi River stretched immense lands, untamed, unsettled, and unknown to most Americans. For many, those distant lands represented hardship and danger, but for others, they symbolized opportunity, freedom, and a promise of prosperity. Even as a boy, I felt T was not born into wealth or influence. My parents, Samuel and Jane Polk, were hardworking people of Scots-Irish descent. They believed in discipline, faith, and education. Though we lived simply, my family gave me something far more valuable than riches, a sense of, I must confess, I was not a strong child. Illness shadowed me during my youth, and at times my health seemed fragile. Yet, where my body was weak, my determination was strong. I discovered early that knowledge could be a source of strength greater than any muscle. I read with passion, studied with intensity, and dreamed with ambition. Books became my companions, and the world of ideas became the field upon now. Let me speak of the times. America in the early 19th century was restless. The ideals of the revolution had not faded, but new challenges were rising. Should our nation remain small, focused only on its Atlantic seaboard? Or should it expand, reaching westward toward the Pacific? Should slavery be permitted to spread, or should it be contained? Should our government be strong? As I reflect upon my life, I see a journey driven by ambition and guided by a belief that the United States was destined for greatness. Expansion, opportunity, and progress. These words echoed in my heart long before they became part of my policies as president. I believed, deeply and fervently, in what came to be called manifest destiny, the idea that our nation was meant to stretch from Os, but I do not wish to begin my tale at its end. Let us instead return to the very beginning, to the story of a young boy born in a humble log cabin in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, who I invite you now. Listen not as though you are hearing a history lecture, but as though you are sitting beside me by the fire, while I recount the story of my own life, the trials I end. I was born on November 2nd, 1795, in a modest log cabin in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina. My family's beginnings were humble, yet proud. My father, Samuel Polk, was a farmer and surveyor, a man of determination who believed in hard work and discipline. My mother, Jane Knox Polk, was a woman of strong faith, descended from the Knox family of Scotch-Irish Presbyterians. From her, I inherited a seriousness of mind, a respect for religion, and a sense of duty that never left me. When I was still a boy, my parents decided to move westward, seeking new opportunities in the frontier lands of Tennessee. We were not unlike thousands of other families at the time, who looked westward with hope in their eyes. It was not a journey of comfort or luxury. We left behind the familiarity of Carolina and entered into the rugged, untamed frontier. I was too young to fully grasp the magnitude of that decision, but it would shape the course of my life. Our family settled near what would later become Columbia, Tennessee. Life there was demanding, yet full of promise. The land was fertile, but it required relentless labor to cultivate. My father's ambition was to prosper, and his hard work did much to secure the future of our family. He became a respected landowner and community leader, and his influence provided me with a model of perseverance. As for me, I was not the strongest of boys. My health was often frail, and I suffered from painful illnesses. Many wondered if I would ever live to adulthood, but my mother never doubted me. She often reminded me that weakness of body could be overcome by strength of spirit. She encouraged me to devote myself to learning, to discipline, and to faith. Those lessons became the pillars of my character. In our household, faith was no casual matter. My mother raised me in the Presbyterian tradition, and she insisted upon regular prayer, Bible reading, and moral conduct. She believed that a man without discipline was a man lost to temptation. Though later in life I would find myself at odds with certain aspects of rigid religious practice, I always carried with me a deep respect for faith and morality, and my childhood was not one of play or leisure. I did not grow up with the games and carefree amusements that some children enjoyed. Instead, I was often occupied with work, with study, and with my own health struggles. Yet in that strict and sometimes difficult upbringing, I found resilience. I learned to endure, to strive, and to pursue excellence in every task set before me. That I recall vividly the evenings in our Tennessee home, when my father would speak of the world beyond our fields, the politics of the young republic, the opportunities of the frontier, the debates that stirred men's passions. Though I was still a boy, I listened with great attention. The names of men like Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe filled our conversations. I did not yet know that one day I would follow in their footsteps, but the seeds of ambition were already quietly taking root. That in those years, my identity was shaped by two powerful influences: my father's drive to prosper and achieve, and my mother's insistence on faith and discipline. Together, they forged within me a character that was both ambitious and restrained, eager for success, yet bound by duty. As I look back upon my childhood, I see not a life of ease or comfort, but one of preparation. The hardships I endured, my illnesses, the struggles of frontier life, the strictness of my upbringing, were not obstacles, but foundations. They prepared me for the challenges that awaited me as a young man. And so, as my youth gave way to adolescence, my mind turned increasingly toward education. I hungered for knowledge, for learning, for the tools that would allow me to rise beyond the limitations of my frail body. I dreamed of a future not confined to the farm or the frontier, but one that might carry me into the halls of government and the councils of power. That hunger for education would soon define the next chapter of my life, my journey into the world of study and scholarship, where I would discover my voice, my purpose, and my path toward leadership. As I grew older, it became clear to me, and to my parents, that my future would not be shaped by physical strength or labor in the fields. My body, often weakened by illness, was not suited to the harsh demands of frontier life. But my mind was restless, hungry for knowledge, eager to grasp ideas and truths that lay beyond the boundaries of our farm. And my mother, Jane, was especially insistent that I receive a proper education. She believed that discipline of the mind was as important as discipline of the spirit. My father, Samuel, though a man of the land, came to see that my path would not be through farming, but through learning. And so, with their encouragement, I began my formal education. It was not an easy start. My health troubles followed me even as I pursued study. In fact, as a teenager, I was forced to undergo surgery for a painful urinary stone, a procedure done without anesthesia, in a time when medical practice was harsh and uncertain. I endured that trial with great suffering, but it taught me a lesson in endurance that never left me. Afterward, I felt renewed, as though Providence had given me a second chance to devote myself fully to my calling. Once recovered, I turned to my studies with even greater zeal. I attended a series of small academies in Tennessee, where I mastered the basics of reading, writing, arithmetic, and classical learning. I was not the most naturally gifted student, but I was perhaps the most determined. What I lacked in talent, I made up for in persistence. Hour after hour, day after day, I buried myself in books. In 1816, I entered the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. To this day, I remember the awe I felt upon stepping into that place of higher learning. For a boy from the Tennessee frontier, it was as though a new world had opened before me, a world of philosophy, history, literature, and politics. At Chapel Hill, I encountered teachers who challenged me to think deeply, to question, to debate. I studied Greek and Latin, absorbed the writings of classical thinkers, and engaged with the political philosophies that had inspired our nation's founders. The Federalist Papers, the speeches of Jefferson, the writings of Madison, all of these stirred my imagination. They awakened in me not just an interest, but a calling. I graduated in 1818 with honors, an accomplishment that filled my family with pride. For me, it was not the end of learning, but the beginning of a new journey. Education had given me the tools to think critically, to speak with clarity, and to understand the great questions of governance. In LAWIT was also during these years that I discovered my talent for oratory. Though naturally reserved and serious, I found that when I spoke about ideas I believed in, my voice carried conviction. Others began to listen. I realized then that words, carefully chosen and powerfully delivered, could shape opinions, inspire action, and change the course of events. Upon returning to Tennessee, I faced the question of what path to pursue. Many of my peers turned to business or farming, but I felt drawn toward the law and public service. Law, I believed, was not merely a profession but a gateway into politics, a means of shaping society and guiding the destiny of the nation. That I studied law diligently under respected mentors and was admitted to the bar in 1820. Practicing law gave me the chance to sharpen my reasoning, to master argument, and to understand the machinery of justice. But more importantly, it introduced me to the world of politics, where I quickly discovered that my ambitions reached far beyond the courtroom. Looking back, my years of education and early growth were more than preparation. They were transformation. I entered university as a boy unsure of his place in the world and emerged as a young man with a vision, a voice, and a calling. I was no longer the frail child who suffered on the frontier. I was a man ready to step onto the stage of public life. And so, my friends, my path turned toward politics, where I would find both purpose and destiny. The next chapter of my life would bring me into the turbulent and often unforgiving world of governance, debate, and power. As I embarked upon my legal career in Tennessee, I quickly realized that the practice of law was only one avenue to influence the world. The law taught me structure, argument, and the importance of principles. But politics was the arena where ideas met action, where conviction could shape the destiny of a state, even a nation. In Tennessee, the air was thick with debate. The young state was vibrant and growing, yet divided in opinions about governance, economic policy, and the role of federal power. I watched men of talent and ambition argue fiercely in town halls, courthouses, and private gatherings. These experiences awakened in me a passion for public life that I found particular inspiration in the leadership of Andrew Jackson, a man of great energy and force. His rise from humble beginnings to national prominence captured my imagination. Though I admired his tenacity, I did not always agree with his methods. I sought to forge my own path, grounded in principle, careful calculation, and unwavering ambition. My entry into politics was gradual but deliberate. I began by participating in local debates, offering counsel to friends and neighbors, and making connections with influential figures in Tennessee. I learned quickly that politics required more than knowledge. It demanded patience, strategy, and the ability to navigate alliances without compromising one's core beliefs. In 1823, I was elected to the Tennessee House of Representatives. Though still young, I approached this responsibility with seriousness. Every vote I cast, every speech I made, I considered as a reflection of my character and my vision for our state and our nation. I realized that even as a freshman legislator, one could shape policy, influence opinion, and gain the trust of constituents. During these early years, I developed an enduring belief in discipline, preparation, and loyalty. Politics, I learned, is not won through charm or luck, but through careful study of issues, persistence in advocacy, and unwavering commitment to those who place their trust in you. I also observed the dangers of impatience and pride. A single misstep could derail a career years in the making. I became particularly interested in issues of economic development and territorial expansion. I understood that the strength of a nation rested upon its resources, its infrastructure, and its ability to project influence beyond its current borders. These ideas, radical to some in my time, would later define much of my presidential agenda. Mentorship played a crucial role during these formative years. Senior politicians, lawyers, and community leaders offered guidance, sometimes with gentle correction, sometimes with stern challenge. I absorbed every lesson, aware that knowledge without application was meaningless. I also learned the art of building alliances, choosing my battles carefully, and positioning myself for opportunities that might arise. By the late 1820s, I had built a reputation as a capable, thoughtful, and determined young statesman. I was still ambitious, yet cautious, aware that a career in politics required timing as much as talent. Every speech, every vote, every public appearance was a step toward a larger goal, a goal I dared not yet fully articulate even to myself. Looking back, I see that my early political awakening was as much about self-discovery as about public service. I realized that leadership required not only skill and intellect, but also resilience, vision, and a willingness to take calculated risks. These early experiences would guide me in the tumultuous years ahead, as I sought higher office and the opportunity to leave a lasting mark on our nation. Thus began my journey into public life, a journey defined by careful strategy, unwavering ambition, and a growing understanding that the destiny of a man is often entwined with the destiny of his country. By the late 1820s, my work as a lawyer had granted me more than a livelihood. It gave me influence, connections, and insight into the workings of government and society. Each case I argued, each dispute I settled, taught me lessons in negotiation, persuasion, and strategy. I came to understand that the law was not merely about justice, but about power, timing, and opportunity. That it was during this period that I truly began to see the potential of a political career. I had gained the respect of my peers, developed a reputation for diligence and integrity, and honed the skills that would serve me well in public office. Yet I knew that ambition alone was insufficient. To rise, I needed alliances, timing, and a clear vision for the future. In 1825, I was elected to the United States House of Representatives. I was still in my 30s, young compared to many of my colleagues, but determined to prove my worth. Washington, D.C. was a city of energy, intrigue, and debate. From the very first day, I realized that the national stage was far more complex than Tennessee politics. Here, every decision mattered, every vote was scrutinized, and every alliance had consequences. That I approached my role with meticulous preparation. I studied legislation, learned the positions of my colleagues, and sought to anticipate political currents before they became apparent. I quickly developed a reputation as a legislator who was reliable, disciplined, and highly strategic. My speeches were carefully crafted, my votes deliberate. I did not seek attention for its own sake. I sought results, influence, and a path forward. During these years, I became closely aligned with the Democratic Party, supporting the ideals of Andrew Jackson while maintaining my own cautious, calculated approach. Unlike some who relied on charisma or popular appeal, I relied on preparation, organization, and the ability to deliver on promises. This methodical approach would later define much of my political career. That I also became deeply involved in debates over tariffs, internal improvements, and the role of the federal government. These issues were not abstract. They had real consequences for the people of Tennessee and for the nation at large. I argued passionately, but always with careful attention to facts, precedent, and strategy. It was not enough to be loud or emotional. A legislator needed to persuade, to navigate complex alliances, and to seize opportunities when they arose. Over time, my careful approach began to pay off. I gained the trust of senior party leaders, became known as someone who could deliver results, and positioned myself as a rising star in Tennessee politics. Colleagues began to seek my advice, and my influence expanded beyond my district to national issues. Yet I never lost sight of the importance of constituents. Every letter I received, every conversation with voters, reminded me that a political career is not built solely in halls of power, but in the lives of ordinary people. Their needs, their hopes, and their frustrations were as important to me as strategy or prestige. I believe that true leadership required both vision and attention to the people one serves. By the time I completed my terms in the House, I had developed not only experience and knowledge, but also a reputation for discipline, integrity, and ambition. I had learned how to navigate the treacherous waters of politics, to balance principle with pragmatism, and to prepare for the next stage of my journey, a stage that would take me to the governorship of Tennessee and, eventually, to the presidency itself. Looking back, I see that these years were crucial. They were the period in which a young lawyer became a rising politician, a man with both vision and the skills necessary to achieve it. Every speech, every vote, every alliance built during this time laid the groundwork for the greater challenges and responsibilities that awaited me. After several terms in the United States House of Representatives, I had gained invaluable experience in national politics, and yet my ambitions reached beyond the halls of Congress. I understood that to truly make a difference, and to position myself for higher office, I needed executive experience, a role where I could lead directly rather than simply legislate. In 1839, I ran for governor of Tennessee. The campaign was fierce. Tennessee politics were deeply divided, and many viewed me as ambitious, calculating, perhaps even relentless. I did not deny these traits, for they had carried me this far. Yet I also emphasized my record of service, discipline, and practical results. My speeches were measured, my strategy meticulous, and I relied upon the trust one had built among voters during my years in Congress. Winning the governorship was no easy feat, but victory taught me lessons in leadership, administration, and political navigation. As governor, I was responsible not only for policy decisions, but also for managing the state's finances, infrastructure, and relations with both citizens and legislators. I learned that authority required careful judgment, patience, and the ability to balance competing interests without losing sight of principle. During my tenure as governor, I focused on fiscal responsibility and internal improvements. Tennessee's growth depended on roads, canals, and institutions that would connect communities and strengthen the state's economy. I also paid attention to the management of state finances, striving for efficiency and transparency. These experiences deepened my understanding of governance, from the practical demands of administration to the subtle arts of negotiation and compromise. Yet, even as governor, I remained deeply engaged with national issues. The question of westward expansion, the tensions over slavery, and debates about tariffs and trade were never far from my mind. I knew that the presidency and the responsibility to guide the entire nation might one day fall within my reach. Every decision I made, every alliance I cultivated, and every policy I pursued was informed by that long-term vision. The years in Tennessee taught me much about the demands of leadership. I learned that bold decisions must be tempered with caution, that vision must be paired with practical strategy, and that public service requires both principle and pragmatism. I also became acutely aware of the delicate balance between popularity and effectiveness. A leader cannot simply seek approval. One must also act decisively for the long-term good, even when that path is unpopular. By the time I concluded my terms as governor, I had developed a reputation as a disciplined, strategic, and capable leader, prepared for the challenges of national office. My experience in both legislative and executive roles had shaped me into a man ready to guide not only a state, but eventually a nation. Looking back, I see these years as the critical bridge between my early political career and my ultimate ambition, the presidency. They tested my skills, strengthened my resolve, and allowed me to refine the principles and strategies that would later define my administration. I had learned how to plan, execute, and endure, and I was ready to step onto the national stage with a clear vision for America's future. After serving as governor of Tennessee, I understood that my ambitions had grown beyond the state level. I had a vision for the nation, for its expansion, its development, and its destiny. Yet the path to the presidency was not straightforward. Politics is rarely kind to impatience, and opportunity must be seized with precision and timing. In the early 1840s, the Democratic Party was navigating internal divisions, debates over leadership, and differing visions for the future of the United States. I saw in this moment a chance, not through rash ambition, but through careful calculation, to position myself for the highest office. I needed national recognition, a reputation for both principle and pragmatism, and the support of key party leaders that I considered the vice presidency as a stepping stone. Though often viewed as a ceremonial role, it could provide the national stage, visibility, and political experience necessary for a presidential run. In 1844, I was offered the opportunity to seek the Democratic nomination for vice president. I approached this with caution, understanding both the promise and the risks. At the Democratic Convention, I presented myself not as a showman or populist, but as a man of discipline, preparation, and principle. I emphasized my record in Congress and as governor, my knowledge of policy, and my commitment to the vision of a stronger, expanding nation. I sought allies, built coalitions, and engaged in careful negotiation behind the scenes. Politics, I had learned, is as much about strategy and relationships as it is about public speeches. The party's nomination process was intense, requiring both persuasion and patience. Delegates debated, alliances shifted, and every decision carried weight. I learned that ambition alone is insufficient. One must also demonstrate reliability, judgment, and loyalty. Every conversation, every pledge, every endorsement mattered. Ultimately, the path to the vice presidency did not materialize as I had hoped. Yet I did not see this as a setback. I understood that political life requires both timing and persistence. Though I did not attain the role immediately, the experience deepened my understanding of national politics, strengthened my network of allies, and clarified the strategy one would later employ in my presidential campaign. But at the same time, the question of the presidency itself loomed ever larger. The nation faced important choices: expansion westward, the annexation of Texas, debates over the Oregon Territory, and the direction of federal policy. I believed I had the vision, the discipline, and the temperament to lead in these turbulent times. I also recognized that the presidency required not charisma alone, but the ability to plan carefully, execute decisively, and maintain steadfast focus on long-term objectives. Through these years of preparation, observation, and strategic positioning, I built the foundation for my ultimate candidacy. I knew that to succeed, I needed unity within the party, support from influential figures, and clear articulation of my vision. Every meeting, every speech, every alliance was a deliberate step toward the presidency. By 1844, I was ready. My experience in Congress and as governor, my understanding of policy, and my network of allies had brought me to the brink of my goal. The campaign ahead would be challenging, but I was confident in my preparation, in my judgment, and in my vision for the United States. The road to the presidency is rarely direct, but with patience, strategy, and unwavering commitment, a determined man can reach the highest office in the land. And so, with careful planning and steadfast resolve, I prepared to launch my campaign for President of the United States, determined to pursue the goals I had long envisioned for our nation's expansion and prosperity. When I assumed the presidency in 1845, I knew that my term would be defined not merely by administration, but by action. I had a clear vision for the United States: to expand its territory, strengthen its position on the continent, and secure its future as a powerful and prosperous nation. One of the most pressing issues of my presidency was the annexation of Texas. This vast territory, recently independent from Mexico, was both an opportunity and a challenge. It was rich in resources and land, yet its annexation was controversial. Critics feared it would provoke conflict with Mexico and intensify debates over slavery. I, however, believed that the nation's destiny required bold action. Through careful diplomacy, strategic negotiation with Congress, and steadfast leadership, I secured the admission of Texas into the Union. This was a defining moment, demonstrating that firm commitment and strategic planning could achieve transformative results at the same time. Attention turned to the Oregon Territory, a vast region claimed by both the United States and Great Britain. Many Americans demanded immediate expansion to the Pacific. I knew that diplomacy would be crucial. War over this territory would be costly and dangerous. I pursued careful negotiation with Britain, balancing firmness with patience. Ultimately, we reached a compromise, the Oregon Treaty of 1846, which established a clear northern boundary and secured the territory for the United States without bloodshed. This demonstrated that calculated diplomacy could achieve expansion while preserving peace. California, then part of Mexico, presented yet another opportunity. While full annexation would come later, my administration laid the groundwork for its eventual inclusion. I focused on strengthening claims in the Southwest, encouraging settlement, and preparing for potential negotiations or conflict. I understood that the nation's westward growth required not just conquest, but planning, infrastructure, and vision. Throughout these years, my approach to expansion was guided by a principle I held firmly: manifest destiny. I believed that the United States was destined to stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific to provide opportunity, freedom, and prosperity to future generations. Yet I also knew that this destiny demanded careful execution. Rash action could provoke war or domestic unrest. Strategic planning, strong negotiation, and decisive leadership were essential. My administration faced criticism from those who feared change or doubted the wisdom of expansion. Yet I remained steadfast. A president must balance the immediate pressures of politics with the long-term goals of the nation. Every decision regarding territory, Texas, Oregon, and California, was made with the nation's enduring interest in mind. Looking back, these early acts of expansion defined my presidency. They required courage, calculation, and vision. They demonstrated that a determined leader, armed with strategy and principle, could shape the nation's future. By the time my term concluded, the United States had grown significantly, not just in territory, but in strength, confidence, and purpose. These years also taught me a profound lesson. Leadership is measured not only by vision, but by the ability to implement that vision carefully, persistently, and decisively. Expansion was not merely a goal, it was a responsibility, a mandate to ensure that the nation could flourish across a continent for generations to come. And yet, the story was far from complete. With expansion came conflict, and soon the nation would face war in the South, the Mexican-American War, a challenge that would test my leadership, resolve, and the very principles upon which our republic was founded. While the annexation of Texas and the settlement of the Oregon boundary were significant achievements, they also brought challenges that demanded careful leadership. One of the greatest tests of my presidency came with the Mexican-American War, a conflict that would ultimately secure vast territories for the United States and fulfill part of the vision of continental expansion I had long pursued. The roots of the conflict lay in the disputed borders of Texas. Mexico refused to recognize Texas as part of the United States, and tensions escalated as both nations deployed forces along the border. I understood the gravity of the situation. War is never to be taken lightly, for it brings death, disruption, and uncertainty. Yet I also recognized that the security and future of our nation and the principles of expansion and sovereignty required decisive action that I sought first diplomatic solutions. Envoys were sent to negotiate with Mexico, and offers were made to purchase territory peacefully. But Mexico was unwilling to compromise, and the border disputes continued. Faced with this intransigence, I took measures to protect American interests and to assert the nation's claims. I called for military readiness, prepared Congress for potential conflict, and made clear that the United States would not retreat from its rightful claims. When hostilities began in 1846, I acted decisively. The war required careful planning and coordination, both politically and militarily. I appointed capable generals, provided clear objectives, and ensured that the nation's resources were directed efficiently toward victory. I also faced criticism, both at home and abroad, from those who questioned the legitimacy of the conflict. Yet I remained convinced that strong leadership demanded courage and action in the face of opposition. The war unfolded across vast distances, from the deserts of the Southwest to the valleys of northern Mexico. Our forces secured victories, and key territories were brought under American control. Each success was a step toward fulfilling the vision of a nation stretching from coast to coast. Ultimately, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848 formalized the acquisition of a vast expanse of land, including what are now California, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. This enormous addition to the Union represented not only a triumph of military strategy, but the realization of a vision I had long pursued, a nation capable of growth, prosperity, and influence across an entire continent. Yet, with expansion came responsibility. The new territories raised questions about governance, settlement, and the balance between free and slave states. I understood that leadership did not end with conquest or acquisition. The true test lay in managing the consequences of expansion wisely, fairly, and strategically. Reflecting on this period, I recognized that the Mexican-American War was both a challenge and an opportunity. It demanded courage, careful planning, and unwavering commitment to the nation's interests. It also illustrated a principle I held throughout my presidency, that a leader must combine vision with execution, courage with prudence, and ambition with principle. By the conclusion of the war and the territorial acquisitions it secured, the United States had been transformed. We had grown in size, resources, and potential. The nation's future was more promising than ever, yet it was also filled with new challenges. Challenges that would test the wisdom, integrity, and foresight of all who followed in the leadership of this republic. Throughout my presidency, I sought to govern with a combination of discipline, focus, and determination. I believe that a president must act decisively, plan meticulously, and pursue a clear vision without distraction. I set ambitious goals for my term and worked tirelessly to achieve them, refusing to allow indecision or political convenience to derail the nation's progress. I am often described as a man of meticulous planning and strong work ethic. I maintained rigorous daily schedules, personally reviewing legislation, correspondence, and reports. I believe that knowledge is power, and I would not delegate judgment on crucial matters without first fully understanding the issues myself. Some considered this intensity excessive, yet I viewed it as necessary for effective leadership. Domestically, I focused on several key priorities. First, I sought to reduce tariffs and cut unnecessary government spending, believing that fiscal responsibility strengthened the nation. I opposed excessive government interference and aimed to maintain a lean and efficient federal administration. This reflected my long-held belief that a strong, disciplined government must manage resources wisely. Second, I emphasized the importance of expansion and infrastructure development. While military victories and territorial acquisitions were essential, I understood that the nation's growth depended on roads, canals, and communication networks that connected distant communities. Internal improvements were not merely conveniences. They were instruments of national unity and prosperity. Third, I addressed issues related to the national bank. I was opposed to renewing the charter of the Second Bank of the United States, believing that centralized financial power could threaten democracy and limit opportunities for citizens. Instead, I encouraged fiscal policies that promoted fairness, stability, and access to capital for local communities. My leadership style was deliberate but assertive. I sought to set clear objectives, communicate expectations, and ensure accountability. I believed in delegation, but only to capable individuals whose loyalty and competence I could trust. At the same time, I was willing to take full responsibility for decisions, knowing that the presidency demanded both courage and accountability, that I also valued patience and strategic timing. Politics is a world of shifting alliances, temporary setbacks, and calculated compromise. I learned to pick my battles carefully, to act decisively when the moment was right, and to preserve influence when circumstances were not favorable. This approach often required restraint, but it ultimately allowed me to achieve the goals I had set for the nation. Beyond policy, I viewed leadership as a moral responsibility. A president must uphold the Constitution, respect the rule of law, and govern for the long-term benefit of the people. Decisions must be guided not by personal gain or popularity, but by principle, foresight, and a commitment to the nation's enduring strength. Looking back on my domestic achievements, I am proud of the progress we made. Fiscal discipline was restored, expansion was strategically guided, and the framework for national growth was strengthened. Yet, I also recognize that leadership is never measured solely by accomplishments. It is measured by consistency, integrity, and the ability to balance vision with practical governance. In these years, I refined my approach to leadership, combining focus with flexibility, ambition with responsibility, and principle with pragmatism. It is this combination that allowed me to navigate both domestic challenges and international conflicts. And it is this combination that, I believe, defines effective and enduring presidential leadership. As my presidency drew to a close in 1849, I reflected upon the years I had devoted to public service. 8 years in the political arena, first as congressman, then governor, and finally as president, had been filled with both triumphs and trials. I had pursued a vision for the nation, expansion from coast to coast, fiscal discipline, and strategic governance. Now, it was time to step aside and allow a new administration to continue the work that I had promised, upon taking office, to serve only a single term. I believed in the principle that public service is a duty, not a lifetime occupation. Leadership must be accountable to the people, and I did not wish to cling to power. True statesmanship, I believed, recognizes when one has fulfilled a mission and when it is time to pass the responsibility to others, returning to private life. I sought the peace and quiet of my home in Tennessee. After years of political intensity, I longed for time with my family, the rhythms of everyday life, and the solace of reflection. I devoted myself to personal pursuits, correspondence, and observing the ongoing growth of the nation I had helped shape. Yet, even in retirement, I remained keenly aware of national affairs. I followed developments in Congress, debates over slavery, territorial governance, and economic policy. I understood that the decisions of one administration influenced the next, and I took satisfaction in seeing the long-term impact of the policies I had implemented in those quiet days. I also reflected upon my own life. I thought of the humble cabin in Mecklenburg County where I was born, the frontier hardships of Tennessee, and the path that had carried me to the presidency. I considered the mentors, allies, and family who had supported me, and the lessons of discipline, perseverance, and principle that had guided every decision. My health, unfortunately, began to decline soon after leaving office. I had long been aware of my own physical fragility, yet the years of intense work and stress had taken their toll. Despite these challenges, I remained intellectually engaged and committed to observing the unfolding story of the United States. That I also reflected upon leadership itself, what it truly means to serve a nation. Leadership, I realized, is a combination of vision, discipline, courage, and moral responsibility. It is measured not only by immediate accomplishments, but by the enduring impact on the people and the nation. Decisions must be guided by principle, executed with strategy, and always mindful of both opportunity and consequence. Though my time in public office was complete, I hoped that my service would be remembered as one of dedication, foresight, and decisive action. I took comfort in the knowledge that the United States was larger, stronger, and more confident than when I first assumed the presidency. The nation's future, though uncertain, was brighter for the steps I had taken, the territory I had secured, and the principles I had upheld. And so, in the final years of my life, I lived quietly, with reflection and gratitude. I had pursued the ambitions of my youth, navigated the challenges of leadership, and fulfilled the vision I had long held for America's expansion and prosperity. My life, from the log cabin in North Carolina to the presidency of the United States, had been shaped by determination, principle, and the unwavering belief that a single individual, guided by discipline and purpose, can leave a lasting mark on history. As I look back upon my life, I see a journey shaped by determination, discipline, and a steadfast vision for the nation. From my humble beginnings in a log cabin in North Carolina, to the rugged frontiers of Tennessee, and finally to the highest office in the land, my path was guided by perseverance, principle, and a belief in the potential of this young nation. That I devoted my life to the service of the United States, first as a lawyer, then as a congressman, governor, and ultimately as president. Each role offered lessons in leadership, responsibility, and the balance between ambition and duty. I learned that true leadership demands clarity of purpose, careful planning, and the courage to act decisively. Even in the face of criticism or uncertainty, my presidency was defined by a singular goal: the expansion and strengthening of the United States. The annexation of Texas, the settlement of the Oregon Territory, the preparation for California's future, and the successful prosecution of the Mexican-American War were all part of a larger vision. These achievements were not the work of one man alone, but I take pride in having guided them with careful strategy, principled decision-making, and unwavering focus. Yet, legacy is not measured only in land or policy. It is measured by the lasting impact on the nation and its people. I sought to govern with integrity, to uphold the Constitution, and to act in the long-term interests of the Republic. I aimed to strengthen the nation's institutions, secure its borders, and expand its horizons. I also understood that decisions made today shape the opportunities and challenges of future generations. That I hope that history will remember me not merely for territorial expansion, but for the discipline, preparation, and determination with which I approached every task. I hope that others may see in my life an example of how a man of modest beginnings, guided by principle and vision, can influence the course of a nation. Reflecting on my personal journey, I recognize the role of family, mentors, and community. My parents instilled in me a respect for discipline and morality. My colleagues and allies offered guidance and support, and the American people entrusted me with responsibilities that I never took lightly. Their faith strengthened me, their challenges honed me, and their trust inspired me that I also reflect on the fleeting nature of life and office. Power and influence are temporary, but the principles and decisions we uphold endure. A presidency is a stewardship, not a possession. The measure of a leader lies not in fame or accolades, but in the tangible and lasting contributions to the nation's strength, unity, and prosperity. As I conclude this reflection, I am filled with a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the opportunities one was given, for the nation I was privileged to serve, and for the chance to leave a mark on the course of history. My life, from the log cabin to the White House, was shaped by purpose, action, and belief in the promise of America. And so, I leave this story with the hope that future generations will continue to build upon the foundation we have laid. The United States is a nation of possibilities, guided by the courage, vision, and determination of those who serve it. May my journey inspire others to act with discipline, to lead with principle, and to dedicate themselves fully to the service of their country.